In this part of the video, we're gonna see what happens after that. The vendor receives the PO and the vendor says, okay, I'm gonna send it now. Maybe he'll take some time, 5 days, 10 days, depending on how long it takes to procure those materials. Say in 10 days, he sends us the 100 kilos of flour, right? So he's gonna load them up in a truck and then send them over to our plant, because we've asked them to supply it to our plant, because that's where we need the flour. Now, along with the truck and the goods comes the packing slip. What is a packing slip? You have seen this when you receive an order from Amazon, right? So when you receive an order from Amazon, in the large brown box, there comes a slip, a piece of paper that says, this is the quantity, this is the material, this is where it's coming from, and this is where it's going to, right? So it's going to my coffee shop, right? And this is the address of my plant, my telephone number, and my customer ID. This is how the vendor refers to me, 25412. And when was the order placed? Say on 1st January 2016. What is the order number? This is his order number, the vendor's order number. And this is my purchase order number, right? So this is where the cross reference is important. I call it potato, he calls it potato. Doesn't matter. It's the same thing. We have different copies in each of our systems. The purchase order, I create a purchase order in my system, number as 45000, and the same order, when he receives it, he's got his own ERP. He enters it as a sales order in his system. So, and it's got a unique number. The vendor uses that to refer to that purchase order or sales order, and I use this number to refer to my purchase order. And don't worry if you don't understand it. You know, it's not important. Not unless you understand the sales processes, you understand what's a sales order number. That's fine. We are talking about purchase order numbers here. And then we have our flour, what quantity, right, and how much has been shipped. Now let's go ahead and say the truck has come in, and we have to now receive the goods into our warehouse, right? How do you do that? Right in the purchase order hierarchy, we have different sections, right? Create, release, blah blah blah, and then we have something called follow-on functions, and under that we have goods receipt. Let's go do a goods receipt. Do you want to save it? No. So under follow-on functions, we have goods receipt. Click on that. Right here you can enter your purchase order. What is this transaction? What is this transaction? How do you know what this transaction is? If you click on this little button here, or this, if you click on these little set of arrows here and click on this button, you'll see a transaction here. It's called MIGO, M-I-G-O. So that's the name of the transaction, MIGO, M-I-G-O. It's a technical name, and the actual transaction is goods receipt for a purchase order. The transaction is MIGO. That's how you can find out what is a transaction code for any transaction that you're doing. Some of them might not have a transaction code, but most end user transactions do have a transaction code. If you want to see them in the menu path, because for example, if you look at this screen, you don't see MIGO here against goods receipt. But if you look at my screen, for example, let's go back. If you see MIGO, right? How do you enable that? You go to Extras, Settings, and then ensure that you have the display technical names checked on, right? If you don't have that, you won't see this MIGO here. If you have that, click OK. You'll have all the technical details there, like so. Okay. Follow on functions, MIGO. So that's how you enable transaction codes. Alright, now we want to receive the goods that the vendor has sent. We want to receive the goods that the vendor has sent into our warehouse. Now the vendor has taken 10 days to send us the goods, right? In the meantime, you'd have created so many different purchase orders, either to the same vendor or to different vendors. So how do you pull back the PO number that the vendor has sent? You could take that packing slip, right? There was a packing slip, remember? This packing slip contains the PO. You could use that. Just type it in and then pull your PO, or you can use search to pull in the PO based on dates or based on who created it. So these are all the search criteria that you have. You can search by company, you can search by purchase order, you can search by purchase document, so on and so forth. Right? You can also search by vendor. For example, if you want to look at all the purchase orders created for that vendor, you could do that. Let's see how to do it. So click on this button, right? We're going to search for purchase orders. Click on that button, and then instead of this tab, go to the vendor tab. Where is it? Purchase documents by vendor, right? And then put your vendor 1222 and click OK. So these are the purchase orders created for this vendor, and I'm looking at the one that is created on 2016. Just select it, click OK, and then as usual hit enter. The system is gonna pull the purchase order details here, right? You can go to the material and you know that the material is flour and the quantity is 100, and where did we ask them to be delivered, Chicago plant, so on and so forth. The system has already pulled all the details for that purchase order, right? So the materials quantities are automatically pulled from the purchase order into this screen. Remember, the purchase order was a different transaction. This is a different transaction. So into this transaction, SAP has pulled all the details from, if you think everything is okay, you can do a visual inspection, and if you think everything is okay, just say item okay. That means you're giving it a thumbs up. Let's do it on the system. Click item okay, right? Hit enter and click post or save. You can do a check as well, to see if there are any errors, and if the system foresees errors, it shows you what the errors could be. In this case, this is a standard error that you might get when you're working on a training system, an IDES system, right? Posting only possible in periods 2006. Almost you're gonna see this error almost all the time in a training system, but when you do it in a productive system, you might not have it. So what does this really mean? Accounting, especially material accounting, don't worry too much about it. What it says is the accounting periods are still only open for 2006 period 11, which is November and December. But we are now in 2016. So the system is 10 years behind because it's a training system. Nobody has updated it. So typically it's the duty of the finance consultant to update it. And how do you update it? You go to a transaction. So we're going to close this here and we're going to do a transaction called MMPV. You want to save it? No. So go to a transaction called MMPV. Okay, click OK and then put your company code 3000 and here put in 12/2006 because that's the period that we have to open. Because 11, I believe 10 and 11 have been closed. It says it's not the current year, 2006, which is fine. Hit enter and it says current year is 12/2006. So we gotta open 01/2007. Okay, so we are entering the next open period. Okay, so period closing is complete, log issued. So this is the message that you see when SAP has successfully closed a period. To understand this a little bit, let me give you a little bit of information here. So we're in 2016, right? So in 2016 has, let's say by convention, has 12 periods, Jan, Feb, so on until December, right? So each period is labeled as 01, 02, 03 all the way until at any given point in time only 2 periods of material management or material accounts are open. For example, we are in April, which means 04 and 03, the previous period, should be open by default. You cannot have more than 2 periods open. But because this is a training system, the system was stuck almost in 2006, right? That was the last transaction anybody has done maybe, right? Now we have got to close each of these periods and then move on to 2007, close each of these periods and then move on to 2008, close each of them and then move on to 2009, on to 2016. So we've got to close 10 years worth of periods to come to the current period, right? This is not a problem in a productive system because it will always be up to date. Because this is a training system, this is something that you have to do to really come up to speed. It doesn't take long really. It looks very it looks very time consuming, but each year doesn't take more than 2 minutes. Okay, let's do it on the system real fast. So another error that you might get when you're executing this transaction is you have to enter a storage location. What is a storage location? A plant is where you manufacture goods. Well, that's the traditional definition of a plant anyway. A storage location is a place where you store the goods. Now, why do we need to have so many different storage locations? For example, if I'm a coffee shop, I store flour, sugar, and all the different kinds of raw materials. I store coffee beans maybe separately because I need to preserve the flavor, so it needs to go into a certain location, and I might store baked goods separately. The point being, a storage location is a place or a conceptual location where we store goods, and one plant could be associated with multiple storage locations. For all practical purposes, think of a storage location as a warehouse. So this plant in Chicago, for example, could be associated with 2 or 3 different storage locations, or it could be just one. And your storage location need not be always based on materials. It could be based on physical location. For example, if my plant is in Chicago, my storage location for coffee could be in Schaumburg, and for something else based on convenience, it could be in Naperville or in Lincoln Park or any other suburbs because real estate is cheaper there. Just like the way we have given a plant a number, each storage location will be given a number to. It could be a number, or it could be alphanumeric, or it could be simply alphabetic, like BKG1 for baked goods, or Naperville 1 for Naperville. So you flag the item as OK and try to do a check again, and you get this error. So where do you fill the storage location? You go to storage location and you can either go to the drop down and select a storage location, or you could just enter the storage location manually like 0001 if you know the storage location. So that's how you fix the storage location issue. Another error that you might have is also related to posting periods. This time it's not the material posting, it's the finance posting. Again, if you are starting for the first time, don't worry. It's not very important, but just know how to fix this. In order to fix this problem, you have to go to the transaction OB52. It's a finance transaction. Select your company code. When I talk about company code, it's the data that you entered in the purchase org data tab. And then for the ending year, make sure you end it in the current year. So this is 2016, so I enter 2016 here. It's really simple. I'll just show it how. So open another tab, go to OB52, scroll down to 3000, and for all these rows I already made the correction, but you see it was 2008 before. Now I have corrected that to 2016. So now you would not get that error, but if you get that error, this is how you fix it. So you go change it and save it. Now you're all good to go. Just save the document, and here you have the material document 5/2503. So this is the material document that's posted. Now how do you check if you have 10 kilos of flour or 100 kilos of flour? The way to do that is via the transaction MMBE. The transaction code is MMBE. Where is it? It's under inventory management. So under logistics, material management, don't open up the purchasing section. Instead, open the inventory management section. So go to inventory management, and under inventory management, go to environment, stock, and MMBE. Let's go there. Go back and open up logistics, material management, inventory management, environment, stock, and stock overview. Now if you double click stock overview and type in MPP401, hit execute, you'd see that this particular warehouse has a stock of 100,198 of this flour. So in this case it's kilos. Now how do you know that the 100 kilos that we have just received has been added to this lot? Well, you really don't know. A quick way to understand it is to create another order again, note down these values, and then try to come back again and refresh this transaction. Let's do it. Let's start all the way, create a purchase order. Now it's going to be easy, right? We know the drill. Enter the vendor, enter the purchase org data, enter the material. Let's put an odd number, say 150. Put the plant as 3100, put a quantity of 150, and save the PO. Note down this PO, Control C, go back, do a MIGO, which is goods receipt. Control V, enter. We got our quantity of 150, and we're gonna get that into the second storage location, say 0002, because we have a stock of 100 in 0002. Now we're gonna add 150 more. That should make it 250. Let's see if it does. Check item OK. Click on check to make sure everything is OK, and if yes, you can go ahead and save the transaction. As soon as this document is saved, we can go back to MMBE and click on this refresh button. What should we expect to see? We should expect to see this 100 being changed to 250, because we have just received 150 kilos of flour and we have stored it in storage location 0002. Refresh, and there you go, 250. So this proves that we really did receive the goods and stored it in a particular storage location of the Chicago plant. So that was MMBE, where you just enter the material, execute, and then it shows you how much stock we have in each of the plants and the respective storage locations. So what have we just done? In the previous video, we have created a purchase order, sent it to the vendor. In this video, the vendor has sent us the goods in a truck, and what we have done is we have recorded that we have received the goods, and we have also verified that we indeed have the goods in a particular storage location of the plant. And we have done that using the transaction MIGO or MIGO. And whenever you do a goods receipt, you do it with reference to a purchase order. So this link here is very important. And anybody at any point in time can go back and see the reference linkage between the purchase order and the goods receipt. How do you see that? You go to the purchase order and see that there's an extra tab here called the purchase order history, which is basically a history of all the transactions that happened against this PO. Well, not all transactions, but goods receipts and invoice receipts that we're going to see in the next chapter. So let's go and see if our purchase orders have these transactions recorded. Go back to purchasing. Purchase order, change or display, because we don't want to create it. And the last created purchase order will automatically be pulled up. Go to the purchase order history tab. Now this tab will not be available if you did not do any kind of subsequent transaction, like a goods receipt for example. But if you have done a goods receipt, this tab will automatically be added, and you can see the goods receipt that has been made against this PO. If you want, you can even just click on that and the system will take you to the MIGO transaction that you have created. See, this is the 150 quantity that we have just received, and we have received it in the warehouse 0002, right? You can go back and then you'll see the PO there. Alright, so that was the link between the purchase order and goods receipt. Alright, we have another exercise here. So the first question is, what is a transaction code to create a goods receipt? This one is really simple. The second question is, list all the storage locations associated with the plant 3100. You can do it in a couple of ways, and I'll show you in the solutions. Third question, do you have to enter quantity in MIGO? This one is a little tricky. Try it out. Number 4, what is the error message you get when you save MIGO without flagging the item as OK? Number 5, can you receive more quantity than ordered in the PO? Meaning, if we have ordered for a quantity of 150, can we receive 160 when the vendor just sends it over? Number 6, what's the transaction code to check the stock level? Alright, so let's look at the solutions for the previous exercise. What is the transaction code to create a goods receipt? The transaction code is MIGO. If you want to know what the transaction code is, go back, and this is how we have used goods receipt. So this is the transaction that you have used to create a goods receipt, right? So under purchasing, purchase order, follow on functions, goods receipt. What's the transaction code? MIGO. List all the storage locations associated with plant 3100. How do you know that? You could do it in two ways. You could look at all the storage locations in the purchase order, or you could do it in the goods receipt. We already know how to look at it in the goods receipt. So let's see where we have the storage location in the purchase order. So go to purchase order, change or display mode, and you could go here, scroll to the right, then click on storage location, and the system will list all the storage locations associated with that plant. So what are these? So 001, 002, 088, 3101, so on and so forth, right? So let's list a couple of them now. So 0001, 0002, 0088, so on and so forth. There is a list of 8 items, 8 or 10 items. The next question is, do you have to enter quantity in MIGO? Create a transaction MIGO. Did you have to enter the quantity? Let's see. In order to test it, the easiest way is to create a purchase order and then do a goods receipt against it. So let's go back and create a purchase order. Let's use the same vendor and same set of data, same material, whatever quantity. I'm going to tab all the way to the right and enter a plant 3100. Okay, and we're gonna hit save. Double click the message, double click the PO, Control C, close this, go back and do a MIGO. Remember the quantity, it was 1. So now paste the purchase order here using Control V, hit enter, and what's the quantity? It's automatically pulled up. In fact, it's grayed out. You can go and change the quantity here. However, you can go and change the quantity here to something else if you want. But to answer this question, did you have to enter the quantity? No. Automatically pulled from PO. Right? The fourth question is, what is the error message you get when you save MIGO without flagging the item as OK? So if you go here and don't flag the item as OK and try to save it, what message do you get? You have not flagged any items as OK. Very simple error message, right? So the message that you get is, you have not flagged any items as OK. Alright, that's simple. Fifth question, can you receive more quantity than ordered in the PO? We have ordered for a quantity of 1. Now we want to receive 2. Hit enter. Is that possible? Let's see. Okay, we should flag this as okay, and then click save. Enter storage location. Of course, we enter 1, then click save. It's a hard error because it's red and it says ordered quantity exceeded by 1 kilo. So the answer is no. So what to do in cases like that? We'll talk about that in a later set of videos. The sixth question is, what is the transaction code to check the stock level? When we check the stock, what is the transaction code that we've used? So it's not under purchasing, but it's under inventory management, environment, stock, and the transaction code is MMBE. Okay, the transaction code to check the stock is MMBE. Alright, that finishes up the solution for this exercise, and let's move on to how to create an invoice. We have seen two transactions in the previous two set of videos. The first one was to create a purchase order. The second one was to receive the goods against that purchase order. After the vendor sends us the goods, he's going to also send us an invoice, which is basically a bill. So it says you're going to pay so much and so much for this set of goods, right? So bills, invoices mean the same thing. Invoice is more of a business standard term. Bill is something that we use in common language. So how does an invoice look like? It's going to look like this. It'll have a date and then invoice number, and then who is being billed, where the goods were being shipped, when is the payment due, what are the materials, in what quantities, what is the total, right? At $4, if the quantity is 1 or 10, the total is 40, and the total gets listed there. And it'll also tell you where you need to send the check to. This is a very simplified version of an invoice. You could make it as complicated as you can. Where do you enter an invoice? Again, you always create an invoice with reference to the purchase order. That's how we typically do it. Go to follow-on functions here. Under purchasing, under follow-on functions, right adjacent to goods receipt, you have invoice receipt. The transaction code for that is MIRO, M-I-R-O. So just double click that, and here you can enter a date like so, right? And then an amount. And before you even do that, you should enter the purchase order against which you are trying to create this invoice. You can copy and paste it if you know it, or if not, you can always go and search. Who's the vendor? 1222, right? Hit execute, and it'll list you all the invoices or all the purchase orders that have been created for that vendor. So select your purchase order and select copy, right? Hit enter, and what's the amount here? 400. So enter an amount of 400. That's how much we want to receive the invoice for. Hit enter, right? All your messages are typically gone. Now you don't need to hit OK here. It's an optional entry. But when you receive the goods, you gotta always hit item OK. But when you're receiving the invoice, this item OK is optional. Click save. There you go. You got the document number created, which is the invoice that we have received, that we are documenting it in the system. This does not mean that we have paid him already. We're just receiving the invoice and documenting it under document number 5105 blah blah blah, right? So you go to MIRO, enter the date that we received the invoice, and get the PO number, enter it here, or you can search for it, and enter the amount in the PO. And until you enter the amount, the message is going to say red, which means it's asking you to enter that amount. Once you enter that amount, balance becomes 0 and it's ready to be posted. Once you save it, your invoice is posted. This is how you receive the invoice. And you can always see it in the PO history. If you go back and look at displaying the PO and look at, it will show you a PO number that was created most recently. And if you look at the tabs here, you don't see the PO history tab, right? In order to open a previous purchase order, click on this button. It says other purchase order. Select that, and then you could go and copy and paste it if you know the number, or you could search for it. You could search for it using the search button. In this case, I know the purchase order number, so I'm gonna select that, and you're gonna see the purchase order history. Right? So you have a material document which was created during goods receipt, and you have an invoice receipt which was created just now. So that's how you see the PO history for goods receipt and invoice receipt. And this is the button that you use to open a previously created purchase order, and this button to create a new PO. To open existing PO. So overall, what have we done? In the first video, we have created a PO. In the second video, we have created a goods receipt against the PO. Remember, it's always with reference. And in this video, we are creating an invoice again with reference to a purchase order. Right? Always with reference to the purchase order. Remember? Let's do an exercise on invoice receipt. The first question is, what is a transaction code to create an invoice receipt? Simple. Second question, does PO history show the invoice detail posted? You've just seen this. Third question is, what happens when the difference amount is large? Difference amount meaning the difference amount between what has been posted versus what is the original PO amount. The fourth question is, do you have to check the OK box at the line item level of the invoice? We have just discussed that. Alright, so let's see the answers to the exercise. What is the transaction code to create an invoice receipt? The transaction code to create an invoice receipt is MIRO, M-I-R-O. The second question is, does PO history show the invoice details posted? Of course it shows the invoice receipt against the PO. Just open the PO, open PO history, and you'll see the material documents and invoice receipts right there. The answer is yes. The third question is, what happens when the difference amount is large? What is it? What do I mean by the difference amount there? Say the invoice received is 50% more than the expected value of the PO. So when you put the purchase order number in there, the value is 400, right? And what is the expected invoice? If it is 400, everything is okay. The balance is 0. But if you put in 410 and check if everything is okay by hitting on the simulate button, you'll see that there are messages here. So the balance is not 0. SAP, based on the configuration, allows you to have a certain level of tolerance, meaning when you expect an invoice of say 400, there could be a certain tolerance level. Now, that depends on the settings that have been done in SAP. Most of the time, there is a certain level of tolerance, say 5% or 2%. But if not, there is a certain way to balance the excess amount. Okay, so whenever you receive an invoice where the expected price was 100 and the incoming invoice is not 100, it could be like 110 or 150 or 190. Depending on the percentage of variation, the system responds with different kinds of messages, and those messages are based on the type of configuration you have done. You can see the messages here in the messages section. We're going to learn more about this when we go through the invoice receipt chapters. But for now, just understand that depending on the configuration, a tolerance is set. The tolerance percentage specifies the percentage variation that's allowed between the expected price and the actual receipt from the vendor. So the answer here is it depends on configuration. Fourth question is, do you have to check the OK box at the line item level? So this is the OK box I'm talking about. Do you have to check it? No. If you just say 400, and then click save. Without checking the OK box, the system will take the invoice. Right? You see the invoice number here. The answer here is no. Okay, that finishes up the exercise. This is a trivial topic. You don't need to worry too much about it because this is typically not an MM transaction. It's an FI transaction. When I mean FI, I mean finance or FICO. So typically, your finance consultant will do this, not you, the MM consultant. So what are we doing here? We are trying to see how to pay the invoice that we have received. And typically you do it after a certain number of days, say 30 days or 45 days. And that is called as a payment term. Now, how do you do an outgoing payment, which is a payment that's sent out to the vendor against an invoice received from the vendor? You go to accounting, financial accounting, accounts payable, and then outgoing payment, right? So let's go there. Accounting. We're gonna close the logistics section and open the accounting section, and open financial accounting, accounts payable, document entry, outgoing payment, then F53. Double click that, and over here we have to enter a date, which is today's date, and of course company code, USD, currency, blah blah blah, and then account. What's the account? This account represents a bank account. Basically what you're doing is issuing a check, but instead of issuing a check, you just mention the bank account number and bank is automatically going to take care of the transaction. So there's an account number that we're going to use. And typically your FI consultant is going to give you that account number. You don't have to worry about that account number. And this account here represents the vendor 1222, right? That's the vendor that we have been using. So transaction code is F53, and this is the bank account number, and this is the vendor account number. Okay, and then hit enter. Now it shows two different line items. One is 400, another is 400. What it means is there are two open invoices that has to be processed for this vendor, each for $400. So you have to select which invoice we are trying to clear here, meaning which invoice we are trying to pay. In this case, both these items are activated. I know this because the color of these two are blue, right, as compared to these. Now I select this and click on this button, which will deactivate that line item. Now we're gonna pay 400 and click on save. There you go. That's the document number that was posted. So let's recap what we have done in this video. We have received an invoice from the vendor, one or two of them, and now we're gonna pay the vendor. So we have just received an invoice, so now we have paid the vendor. We have used the transaction code F-53, entered the bank account number, entered the amount that we wish to pay, and then entered the vendor. As soon as we entered the vendor, we got all the open invoices. We activated the invoice that we wanted to pay, and then saved the transaction, which effectively issues a check from the bank account that we own at the bank to the vendor. And the difference between the previous transactions and the current transaction is the goods receipt and invoice receipt were created with reference to a purchase order, but a vendor payment is not created with reference to the purchase order. This is not the case. It's created with reference to an accounting document created after you posted an invoice receipt. So invoice receipt posts an accounting document, and vendor payment is done with reference to the accounting document. So this is the bare bones procure to pay cycle. There are 4 transactions in the procure to pay cycle. Purchase order, which is a notification to the vendor to supply goods, and when the vendor supplies the goods after a certain amount of time, we create a goods receipt in the system. And after a certain amount of time, the vendor also sends us an invoice, and we document it as an invoice receipt in the system. And finally, when we are ready to pay the vendor, we issue payment to the vendor. These 4 transactions constitute the bare bones P2P cycle, or procure to pay, P2P. Alright, so let's do an exercise now. So what is the transaction code to create a vendor payment? So these exercises are related to payments. And the second question is, do you have a reference to the PO or invoice to pay the vendor? Is the vendor payment accounting document recorded? No.